What's up guys, Rogue9 here. The Tom Clancy's Ghost Recon Wildlands open beta has come to an end, and I thought I might as well put together a quick video with my thoughts on the game. Keep in mind that all opinions you will hear will be based on beta gameplay as well as all of the footage you will see. So with that disclaimer out of the way, let's get to it.
Hostile killed.
I think it's worth addressing the elephant in the room first, and that is this game just a reskin of The Division? And it makes sense. I mean, both games developed by Ubisoft, both games are Tom Clancy games, both games tactical third-person shooters that involve a lot of fancy futuristic gadgets. So I can see how, for people who haven't had a chance to play the game, that could be a valid concern. And for me, having tried out the new Ghost Recon, I can say there is simply no comparison between the two games. I mean, yes, both are third-person shooters, but apart from the immediate differences you'll notice, different gadgets, vehicles in Ghost Recon, like you can drive motorbikes, cars, tanks, helicopters, and even planes. But at the end of the day, all of those I would even say are minor differences. What, in my eyes, really makes these two games fundamentally different is the gunplay. The Division was an amazing game, and I sunk hours and hours and even more hours into it, and quite happily. But if there was one criticism of The Division that I would agree with, it's that the guns are just so weak, or conversely, people are just built like tanks. You can plow hundreds of bullets into your enemies, and they just won't die. And on top of that, I don't really ever remember dealing with much recoil, and for me maybe the greatest offender is that the shooting involves hit scan. So rather than the game modeling a ballistic curve for your bullets, it takes the much simpler approach of simply placing the bullet exactly where you're aiming, much like a laser tag rather than shooting an actual gun. Now I get how that makes sense in The Division since you're fighting within a city and most of your engagements are pretty close, but with Ghost Recon you have a wide open landscape, and I'm really happy to say that they've made the decision to actually model ballistics for each and every weapon. And I couldn't be happier with all of these factors. I think the shooting in Ghost Recon feels amazing. The sounds, the feel of the recoil, seeing your bullets arc out towards enemies that are further away, and then having sort of a realistic power as well that goes both ways. You can take out even heavily armored enemies with a single well-placed shot. And conversely, if you're playing on a high difficulty level, the enemies can do the same to you. I mean, if you get caught out in the open and they know where you are, it can become really difficult to survive really quickly, and that makes it all the more satisfying when you finally complete a tough mission. And before moving on here, I really want to go back and talk about the ballistic modeling again. One of the earliest games that I really liked in terms of the shooting because of the ballistic modeling was Stalker from 2007. But apart from that series, we don't really see it all that often, except maybe when you're playing combat simulators like Arma, or of course some other more casual games as well, like the Battlefield series. But considering that games were mastering this kind of mechanic 10 years ago, it's really surprising to me how many games we still get nowadays that use hit scan instead of actually modeling the bullets. I think especially when it comes to large open world games, this kind of mechanic needs to become the standard for the future. To me at least, it makes the gunplay so much more enjoyable, and I would go as far as to say that in terms of Ghost Recon, it is one of the standout features of the game for me. And I think you could argue that it's kind of important for a shooting game to have good shooting. And from what I've played so far, Ghost Recon Wildlands has good shooting. Another thing I really like about Ghost Recon is the way that the open world has been realized. In that sense, it kind of reminds me of Far Cry 4, where you could play some of the side missions with a friend. Except that similar to The Division, here you can team up with up to 3 other players. But just like in Far Cry, you have more flexibility. In The Division, almost all of the missions are pretty linear. You have an entry point and an exit point, and in between, you're just following a path that the game tells you to. Ghost Recon though, much like Far Cry, has more of a sandbox feel, where if you're attacking an enemy position, you can choose to just go full-on Rambo, run straight in with some kind of vehicle with a mounted minigun, and just mow down the entire camp, or for each and every side mission you can choose to be absolutely stealthy and tactical. You can split up from over a kilometer away and each hike in on different routes, taking up positions around the enemy camp, scout it out with drones at closer range, and have maybe 1 or even 2 players on Overwatch armed with sniper rifles or machine guns, while the other 2 sneak in and quietly attempt to take out the camp. And I have to say, I really like that flexibility. Not only do you get to pick which mission to play when, but you get to pick how to approach each and every task. And maybe one last thing to mention about the open world is that, as has become common for open world Ubisoft games, you have a gigantic map with all sorts of different areas and really versatile and beautiful landscapes. In the beta, we've had access to 2 different areas. One is the initial area, which is kind of like an arid kind of hill country. And the second area is kind of this mountainous area with much greater elevation and loads of snow, very few plants, and right in the middle of this area is an amazing lake covered in flocks of flamingos, because why not? Having spoken of the gunplay earlier, I think anyone who's watched my channel for any length of time will know that I'm a bit of a gun nerd, and boy oh boy do I like the gunsmith. Being able to customize the color not only of your weapons as a whole, but of each individual component, yeah, that's nice to have. I don't mind that, that's okay. But being able to take apart your gun and customize each and every individual part to fit the kind of role you're trying to play within your team, that is amazing. And I think, again, I'm going back to the comparison to The Division, but I do think that the Ghost Recon Gunsmith is better than the weapon customization options in The Division. And maybe just to remind you right here, I really like The Division. So does that mean I really like Ghost Recon Wildlands? Well, maybe the answer is kind of, because the things that I like about Ghost Recon Wildlands, I really like. But at the same time, I think there are still some things that could do with some improvements. It's great that the game has all sorts of vehicles in it, but the vehicle handling is a bit iffy. I mean, okay, you get used to driving motorcycles and cars. They do feel horribly sluggish at first, but you get used to the land vehicles, you really do. And planes, I guess, yeah, it was a bit weird flying for the first time using the mouse and keyboard, but I managed to land without killing us, and yes, again, you can get used to that. But, and this is a big but, what on earth is going on with the helicopters? I mean, I'm no helicopter sim expert, so if you start talking to me about collective and all sorts of stuff like that, I don't know what's going on. So I don't really know how an actual helicopter works. For me, if the controls are like they are in other third-person games, let's say GTA, that's fine by me. Yeah, you push forward on the stick to tilt the helicopter forward, backwards tilts you back, left and right tilts you to the side to strafe around, and on the other stick you can control the turn of your helicopter and you're done. You need one button for acceleration and one button to slow down, which makes you go up and go down. Easy. But for some reason on the PC version that I played, I can't really speak to the consoles, someone came up with the brilliant idea of no, we're not going to use realistic controls, but we're also not going to use arcade controls. And what we've ended up with is really bizarre to me. I mean, the helicopters basically have 2 different flight modes. When you're in hover mode, accelerating moves you up and down, and going forward and backward moves you forward and backward, and left and right turns you left and right. There is no side strafing at all. But then once you start flying forward, after, I don't know, something like 10-15 seconds, the helicopter switches into cruising mode. And now, instead of holding forwards to go forwards, to tilt your helicopter forwards, you just have to keep hold of the acceleration button, and the helicopter just automatically stays tilted forward. And now if you use the up and down keys, or the W and S keys, whichever you're using to move forward and backward, now instead of tilting that helicopter, now that controls the helicopter's height. So mid-flight, your control scheme just suddenly switches to something different. That is just so weird when it starts happening the first time. Yes, you can get used to it, but why even do that? Why? And especially when you have helicopters that actually have miniguns mounted on the sides, what you want to be able to do is complete strafing runs. You need to be able to dip the nose of your helicopter down in order to shoot towards the ground. But once you're in this cruising mode, it becomes really hard to control that. And not being able to tilt the helicopter side to side to do side strafes, I mean, to me, that's just a vital part of the control scheme that is completely missing. So yeah, Ubisoft, if you're listening, I don't know if this is the same on consoles, like I said, but you need to think about changing this. This is horrible. Mini rant over. On to the next one. While I'm speaking of controls, I think also, I mean, again, you get used to it. By the second day, I was getting used to it, and this is again specific to the PC version, but I found that the control mapping was completely and unnecessarily overcomplicated. There were just so many different buttons to map to so many different functions, and that even though the console mechanic of being able to modify your gun by aiming first, I mean, that's basically a switch, right? That's something that is built for controllers. Aiming down sights in order to be able to change your moderator or change the firing mode, all of that is done so that you can double map buttons on a controller. And I don't think it's a bad idea to also bring that into the PC version, but I don't actually remember being able to double map the buttons as you would on a controller, and just ending up with 15 different buttons that you need to memorize is kind of unpleasant. If you can make it work on a console controller, you can definitely come up with a more elegant solution for the keyboard as well. Having said that though, that's kind of a minor gripe. The helicopter thing, that's more important. It would be nice to have if it was just a little bit more intuitive. Another issue I ran into, and this is probably similar for, I would say, all open world co-op games, and that's that for anyone who isn't the host, anyone who's simply joining the game, it can be difficult to actually follow the story. Sure, there are cutscenes, but when another player is choosing which missions to go for and you're just kind of going along with it, it can happen that you just kind of lose track of what you're doing and why. What is the mission? What are we doing here? Why are we attacking this camp? You just don't know what's going on. And that's not something really that I think is a specific criticism to Ghost Recon Wildlands. As I've said, this is very common amongst all sorts of other co-op open world games as well. And in addition to that, I think the solution to that, at least partially, is also that as a team you have to take it a little bit slower and you have to make sure that everyone's on board with what's going on. Give everyone the time to listen to the mission briefing. It just makes it so much more enjoyable rather than the feeling of just running from camp to camp, slaughtering the enemies there, but not really knowing what the ultimate goal is. So maybe this point is just sort of a caution for players to make sure that you're playing the game at a pace that makes it enjoyable, but at the same time, of course, if there's a clever developer that could come up with a way of making sure that everyone knows what's going on and everyone's on board, then that of course would be perfect. So overall, what do I think of Ghost Recon Wildlands? Well, I would say I had a relatively positive experience with it. There were a few things that I think still need to be fixed. I'm looking at you here, whoever programmed those terrible, terrible helicopter controls. Please, someone, make those disappear. But apart from other nagging little things like sluggish ground vehicle controls and a complicated control scheme overall, I have to say I found the game really enjoyable, especially being able to customize your character literally up to the eyeballs, and even more importantly, being able to customize each and every little detail of each and every gun you carry. That, combined with the outstanding shooting mechanics, really makes this game for me. So those are my thoughts on the game. As always, I love talking about video games, so if you've had a chance to try the beta and if you have thoughts on the game, why not post them below? I'd love to hear your opinions. And with that, guys, as always, I hope you enjoyed the video and I will see you in the next episode. Oh, and one last thing that I really like about the game and almost forgot: jokes. Every, I don't know, half an hour or an hour when you're not in combat, your squad mates will tell each other jokes, and yeah, they're quite good. It's a really nice touch. Why don't I leave you with a quick sample at the end here? Enjoy.
So there's this army ranger on leave out in my neck of the woods, and he decided he wanted to get himself a pair of alligator boots. But you know, we're talking a ranger here. He wasn't going to go to no shoe store. No, he gets himself a knife and heads out to the bayou to get him a gator and make some boots for himself. So he gets off the highway and heads back into the country and finds a little old bait shop near the edge of the swamp. He asks the man where he can find himself a gator, and the man gives him directions into the bayou.
This doesn't end with banjo music, does it?
Just let me tell the story, okay? Anyway, the guy at the bait shop says, "Look here, while you're out there, keep an eye out for these 2 Marines I sent in a couple days ago. They were after gator boots too, and they should have been back by now." Ranger says he'll keep an eye out for him, and heads into the bayou. He follows the man's directions and heads way out into the swamp. When he gets to where he's going, sure enough, he sees these 2 Marines standing up to their waists in the water. Over on the shore nearby, there's like 20 dead gators in the mud. Now, as the ranger watches the gator swim up to the Marines, this jarhead jumps on the gator and kills it with his knife, drags it up on the shore, flips it over, and looks at the gator's feet. He said, "Damn it! This one ain't got on no boots either."